if businesses follow those 5 steps, and it's never as clean cut as that. I'd love to be able to say every project follows those 5 steps in sequence. You come back and you learn and do stuff again. But if you meet each of those points, everything becomes so much easier.
Welcome to the Digital Custom Communications podcast, where we discover how leading regulated companies engage, retain, and delight customers at scale. In this episode, we're joined by Phil Courtney, founder of Humans and Money, a consultancy that helps businesses create better digital financial experiences using behavioural science. Phil, your background is financial behaviour. So you worked in the financial sector before setting up Humans and Money. You specialise in investor psychology for your MBA. You've just completed your PhD on people's attitudes to money. Welcome to the podcast, first of all. And why is this so interesting to you?
Good question. Thank you. And thanks for having me, Sam. Happy to talk about this. And I guess the answer is I'm a nerd when it comes to people's financial decisions. It's fascinating and how unpicking how people really think and then the influences that drive them. And as you say, my background is most recently I was head of marketing strategy for a financial advice business. My MBA research is all around investor psychology and what really drives people to make decisions. And then I guess I'm a bit of a masochist. I decided to set up Humans and Money, do a PhD, a couple of kids as well, all in a short space of time, because I wanted to unpick what really drives people. And I think it's such an interesting area. I'm sure we'll cover lots of this, but when we think about regulated industries in general, and particularly I specialise in financial advice, investing and saving. When we think about those sorts of decisions that people have to make, it's right that they are emotionally driven because they're complicated things, they're anxiety inducing things when we think about money or even health, for example. And they're something that people don't often feel comfortable talking about. And when we get this kind of perfect storm of complexity and of emotion, anxiety and fear of losing control and all the things that tend to be related to the experiences that we're talking about, we get this melting pot of influences, which means that people panic, avoid making decisions, don't progress as we would like them to, as people are trying to help those individuals. And it means that we're often influenced by unconscious factors as well. Underlying, if we can't process something consciously, we're often driven by some of the hidden influences. And that's what I love to unpick. So a very long way of me saying I love this stuff because I think it's a fascinating place to be, to understand how people make decisions, how they form attitudes, ultimately how we can help people improve their own behaviours by unpicking what's really driving them.
And applying that in business terms, then you work with firms to understand behaviour and then map that onto process, I guess. So you look a lot at customer journeys. Are there any common pitfalls, common challenges that you see across firms when they're designing or managing customer journeys?
There are. I think there's some common themes that people often feel like they're banging their heads against a wall sometimes. And if we think about some of the providers that I work with, so investment managers, financial advisors, and life insurance businesses, and companies that really want to do well by the people they work with, right? So they're saying, look, we know we're very valuable to you. We know you're making bad financial decisions. We know that we've got something here that can help you be more confident, save more, retire earlier, gain peace of mind, grow your wealth, etc., etc. And the reason I often find themselves kind of figuratively, hopefully, bang their heads against the wall is because people just don't do the stuff they should be doing, right? And people, clients will come to me and say, our product's great. We are great at what we do. Our clients love it, is often the case as well. But there's a huge difference between trying to convince somebody that they should take some action, then actually helping them, encouraging them to take that action as well. So the first kind of challenge that I find businesses have is where to start. They're providing something, hoping that people will just like it and see the value and therefore take action. And unfortunately, we don't work that way. There's a gap between the attitudes we have and our intentions. So I might feel very favourably towards fitness, for example. I might think, that I have a good attitude. Yes, I'd love to be. We're off to Australia in a couple of weeks. I'd love to be on the beach there. It's summer over there and feel great about myself. Do I intend to do anything about it? Maybe not. Realistically, lots of stuff on busy lifestyle, etc. So there's that gap that needs to be addressed. And then the big one we know about, the intention action gap. I could have the best intentions in the world. Am I actually going to eat more healthily, lift the weights, whatever's needed? Am I actually going to complete the digital journey? Am I actually going to take the action required and keep taking the actions that are required of me? Potentially not. So, of course, I'm sure we'll unpick some of this in our conversation. There are lots of influences behind those two gaps, but understanding that those gaps are always going to exist. You could have people with the best attitudes towards what you do in the world. There's a very good chance they're still not going to take the actions that you want them to take and that you feel like they could benefit from, because that's human nature. And that's the bit that is very frustrating for companies to deal with, but also a huge opportunity, right? Because it's once we can pinpoint what's really going to move the mark and encourage people to take action, that has huge benefit to the people that are trying to solve problems for their clients.
So the problem is there's so many demands on all of us today to take action. And, you know, we used to hear this phrase quite a lot. Companies think they can build it and they will come. It's almost, you've hit the nail on the head there. We've got past that. People realize within businesses that they can't just build something like a digital journey and the customers will come. But like you said, there's what is the next step though? Because it's almost like a choice overload. There's so many digital tools, there's so many decisions that you could make in different directions in terms of customer journeys. There are so many options, so many shiny new things available to businesses that making a decision based on your customers, which is what we should all be doing, can actually be quite difficult because you've got so many screens telling you potentially different things about your customers, and pinpointing the right data and getting the right insights out of customers, qualitative or quantitative, can be difficult. So how do you start to glean the right insights, I guess, is the question from the companies or with the companies that you work with?
Yeah, great question. I'll go back a step if that's all right. And so I have an approach that works, a repeatable approach to help in these situations. So called the SHAPE method, SHAPE. And the starting point there is the S, which is strategy. A digital experience is still an experience, right? And yeah, not trying to sound sort of condescending there, but I think the importance is that the experience needs to be right. And I think businesses, when they're producing a digital experience, will jump to the digital bit. It's digital, so we can get lots of data. It's digital, so there are hacks that we can use. There are UI things that we can, tools and tips and techniques that we can use to get people more engaged. That's true. There is lots of data. There are specific things that we want to do differently for digital experiences, and that we know tend to, in most contexts, help people move along a journey. That said, if you haven't built the foundations of the experience, the rest of it is just the decoration. Right? I had an example of a client who is in financial services in retirement products search, really. Very, very complicated experience. But by complicated, I mean users are required to input something like 110 bits of information before they can get the result. Right? That's horrible. But yeah, what other industry, buy a pair of shoes or 2 or 3 clicks maybe. What other industries other than the regulated ones that we're talking about, which you have that kind of experience that you need to take somebody through? And a starting point there, and some advice they'd actually received was, should there be different colours and different imagery on the website? And I was like, that's starting the digital bit, right? That's starting with the design as well, which is further down. The strategy part is where we need to get going. The strategy bit for me answers some very simple questions. What's the behaviour that we want? So what are you trying to get people to do? That's what I call the big behaviour. Then you've got these micro behaviours. So if somebody needs to buy an annuity, transfer their pension, etc., what decisions and actions they need to take along the way? There are a number that we need to get people through. And what we end up in are these sorts of cycles, behavioural cycles that the people need to go through. To help us understand that, we need to think through what the journey looks like, and that will involve insight from users. It will involve insight from people in the team, making sure that we're complying with regulation, all that kind of stuff. But we need to map out what those behaviours are that we want people to do. If somebody's got a current experience, we want to see, okay, what are people currently doing? More specifically, who is doing those things? Who's dropping off at this point here? Who are the ones that aren't dropping off? Who are the ones that carry on? What do they look like in terms of maybe demographics, but their motivations? Are they repeat customers? Their behavioural traits? What sources are they coming from? What's the commercial impact of all this? again, I'll often have the conversation with my clients where they say we want to improve engagement. Do you want to improve engagement? Yeah, we want to improve financial well-being. Do you want to improve well-being if that means that someone withdraws all their assets for your platform? Probably not. There's a caveat there. We want to improve well-being by doing this thing. So it sounds like it's the kind of straightforward stuff to an extent, but it's a really important bit. Getting the strategy right. And insights are useless if you're not going to do anything with that information. Lots of people I speak to get in this kind of choice overload, this sense of overwhelm where they've got too much data now and the data is driving. So I've got this data, we should probably do something with it. What should we do? Rather than the other way around, which is, okay, what question do we want answered? What does the data say? What decision are we going to make? And action are we going to take because of that? So that strategy bit's really important. That's just the S, Sam. I don't know whether you want me to speak about the rest or...
Yeah, so let's, I jumped a stage there, but let's use that as a framework to guide us then. So we establish our goals and then we need to answer how we get to the next step, right? So let's dwell a little bit on the insights, because I think insights are often misunderstood, because insights are not just data, right? Insights are something that you extrapolate from data. They're often a combination of data. It could be one piece of data, but it's not just saying we have X number of users. That doesn't help. That doesn't help answer the problems that the strategy or the questions that the strategy brings up aims to solve. So how do you get insights? What are the best ways to get insights? What are the different ways that you can get insights?
Yeah, great question. For me, again, that starts with what are we trying to answer? Or what behavior are we trying to encourage? And therefore, problem we're trying to solve. And I equate those two, the problem we're trying to solve, because there's an assumption there that people aren't doing the thing at the moment. Right? If we're building a new product, then we know what behavior we want them to take or what we want them to do. If it's, in most cases, an existing experience, well, they're not doing the thing, or the people that we want to do the thing aren't doing it in the right way, perhaps, or they're not enjoying doing it, or there's something there that is a problem for us. So what problem are we trying to solve? Once you've got that, what data do we need? So first is getting that question the right way around. And again, not to labour this point, but because there's so much data, so little insight out there, really, we need to get that problem the right way around. So once you've got this problem that we need solving, the data that we call upon to solve that problem depends. It depends what question we're trying to ask, what problem we're trying to solve. So I'll give you an example. Qualitative interviews where we're asking people for their thoughts on stuff are very helpful for exploratory problems where we just don't know what we don't know. Yeah, we're looking for the unknown unknowns. We're looking for the stuff that isn't even on our radar yet. And we're listening to people, trying to empathize with people who might be our ideal clients, to understand their problems. And there are behavioural techniques that we can use to make sure those interviews are really robust and accurate, and we can tease out the right information. So, for example, if there are sensitive topics like health, like financial decisions, we'll often use mechanisms like tapping into people projecting their emotions. So rather than me say to you, Sam, come on now, we can see here that your finances are a bit of a mess. Why? That's a very extreme example. But if I was to ask that in a way that's more likely to tease out some of the information that we really want, we'd say, understand people end up in these situations where actually they're not quite in control of their money. Why do you think other people would end up being in that sort of situation where they don't feel in control of their money? Or what do you think is stopping them from being in control of their money? Projecting it onto somebody else, looking at removing responsibility. I'm not saying, Sam, why have you made bad decisions? I'm saying what's stopping other people, potentially people like you, from doing it? What's got responsibility for that that's holding you back? So qualitative interviews get a bit of a bad rep. It's seen as a bit of an ancient historic way to generate insights now, but they're hugely powerful if they're done correctly. A lot of insights aren't done correctly. A lot of client feedback, user insight programs aren't, but by introducing the right techniques, you can make those really valuable. But that's an example. The type of technique people use depends on the problem. So ideally, we focus on behavior. What are people actually doing? We can tell behavior is very concrete, right? It's a great unit of measurements that we know it's accurate because they've done the thing. If we need to predict future behavior, we can often look at what people have done in the past elsewhere as well. So rather than saying, would you use an experience that helps you do X, Y, Z, we can ask about the last time they did something to achieve X, Y, Z. If back to my holiday example, if you were trying to really gauge my intent, see how serious I was about getting healthy, clearly not that serious from my reflections, you'd say, okay, so you're going on holiday. The last holiday, Did you end up getting fit and healthy for that? Oh, you didn't. Okay, talk to me about what stopped you. If you say to me, Phil, do you plan on getting fit? Yeah, of course I do. But if you look at previous behaviour, you get a better insight. So again, different tools you can use to either look at what someone's doing at the moment or look at their past behaviour. And then we could look at identifying unconscious influences as well. So rather than ask somebody a very direct question, which relies on them to know the answer, which they might not do, they might not know what's driving them. They might not know why they're avoiding money, and they might post-rationalize, which is what a lot of people do, a reason for why they're making decisions. If we ask them, we're putting all the pressure on them to come up with the answer. If instead we, for example, put a couple of examples in front of them and ask them to pick which one they prefer, they don't have to explain why they picked it. We do the thought process there when we put into, say, examples of communication, for example, framed in different ways. We can see that people, did a great piece of research on this, certain people are more loss averse than others. And we can see that by putting different communications in front of them, seeing what they respond better to. If I ask those people, what do you think is influencing you? And they wouldn't say, hey, well, I'm loss averse, and I'm more loss averse than so-and-so over here. So there are ways we can structure insight projects, the highlight phase, highlighting projects to make sure that we're getting the most accurate, robust data possible. But it all needs to start with getting the right data for the problem we need to solve rather than the other way around.
Is there a case where you would come up with or come out of that process with too many insights? Because, if I'm thinking about projects that I've been involved in, it's often been the case that, okay, we've conducted some research and some testing. We have a bunch of things that we could do that could shift the needle in terms of customer experience. And I guess in that I'm saying shift the needle in terms of customer experience and business outcomes, because ultimately, as you say, you can't really remove one from the other. It's not just about financial well-being, it's about the bottom line as well. Those things have to play together. So I've got a bunch of insights. How do I decide what to prioritize at that stage when I've possibly only got budget to do fixes or to tweak the journey based on a couple of them?
Again, a great question and a really common challenge, right? If we think about what that example would look like in practice, those insights would be potential solutions. Right, so before we get to the solution stage, hopefully we've identified what are the issues in the first place. So from a commercial point of view, we're starting that strategy bit. Say, where's the biggest bang for our buck? Where can we move the needle, really make a difference to our clients' lives, potentially our commercial objectives as well, whatever the objectives of the project are. So by the point where we start generating insights, we already know what would be a priority area for us to focus. Then if we get a few different solutions, we can triangulate those insights from the clients, the customers, which will be one perspective. We want to be informed by behavioural research, what exists out there at the moment, and applied to our context. Again, that'll be always a big part of any highlight project. What's out there? Lots of research is being conducted. What already exists that might apply to our situation, and then what's feasible as well, because all of this stuff, this isn't a theoretical experiment. We're talking about limited resources, people, time, money to make changes in an experience. So what's feasible to action right now? And the triangulation of those three things should give us a pretty good steer. The other thing I would say is when we apply changes, we learn as well. Now, the insights don't stop when we say, right, now we're going to go down route A or route B. In an ideal world, we go down route A and B because we have informed hypotheses and we're now going to test those. And it's so easy to test digital experiences now. Even the last 6 months, the things that I'm able to do with my clients in terms of getting to prototype stage far quickly today, working with a digital advice business. And we're at prototype stage. We had a call yesterday afternoon. Today, we're at a stage close to getting something in front of people and testing it. Yeah, that wasn't even available 6 months ago, 12 months ago. So we should take advantage of that. We're informed by insights, but that gets us to a stage where we're confident enough to test something. And that barrier to testing is so low now that I always advocate to get things in front of people as quickly as possible and look at what they actually do with it. Look at the behaviours, look at what they're doing when they have different options and decisions they're making. Again, when we're testing something, it needs to be informed by our problem. What are we looking for here when we're testing? We don't just want to put something in front of people and say, what do you think? That's not a good testing approach. But we can get something in front of them pretty quickly, and that feeds back into this insight kind of loop. We might have to make some changes, or we say, great, validated, it's made the difference we hoped, let's now roll it out. So that cycle is hugely powerful and quite easy for companies to do now. There's less and less of an excuse to get things in front of people, whereas certainly 5 years ago, the goal of a research project was to be create a nice document and maybe a PowerPoint presentation of a slide deck of what the insights show, and give it to a board in front of an executive committee and say, look, isn't this great? And someone says, yeah. Now the goal of insight is to get to testing as quickly as possible and validate that something's going to have a positive impact once it's rolled out.
So in terms of regulated businesses, is that where you see compliance coming in to play the most at that testing stage when you're looking at the feasibility of different solutions? Obviously, compliance plays its part in every stage of a project. But, if I'm thinking the design of customer journeys to play on or trigger or impact people's behavior, there must be many different regulations in financial services and beyond that limit our ability, quite rightly, to influence customers in these ways. What kind of regulations are you looking at, or do you come into contact with when you're looking at influencing behavior?
Yeah, great question. The first part of that, when you evolve compliance from the offset in an ideal world, sometimes people are precious about their area. I find a lot of the time, particularly compliance departments get a bad rep. Commercially, I've worked with lots of different types as an employee and in my role as a consultant, working sort of different groups within businesses. And good compliance people want to help, right? They genuinely do want to help people. So involving the right people from an early stage is very useful, because there are often some nuggets that they have a different thought on. They're the experts in their area. So why not involve the good people? Because the importance of doing that is that this overarching role of regulation fits in at every step as well. And particularly financial services, which is where I solely work, we have to be careful about the sorts of questions we're asking and how we're asking it, and then what information we're capturing from people and so forth. At the insight stage, there are kind of guardrails to what we can do. If I said, well, why don't we attract people, send out a really, really powerful kind of in-your-face message. There are financial promotion regulations in the UK. There's consumer duty and MiFID 2. There are lots of regulations that we'll just know before any work's conducted. But then there's the firm-specific take on all of those things as well, what they want to do, what their kind of appetite for risk is in terms of what they might produce for clients or how they like to communicate with clients. So they're the objective regulatory requirements. But then there's also I use the word appetite for risk, the culture within the firm that you need to understand. And then compliance departments and people are often really, really good at feeding in their thoughts around that as well, because what we don't want to end up with is a solution which on paper sounds great and it's exciting and fun, and we know it's going to change people's behavior, but actually it's just not right for that firm because it's not how they want to act, and it's not part of their culture. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sam, but for the early stage.
Absolutely. So let's drill down on one of the examples that you gave, because I think it's quite interesting. Consumer duty, hot topic, maybe not hot anymore, relatively recent topic. Everybody's been talking about it for a while now. How has consumer duty affected how firms you're working with communicate with their clients and customers? And so you mentioned there, the appetite to risk and the culture. I think with a lot of firms and their approach to regulation, it's how ahead of that particular vein of the philosophy behind the regulation do we want to be? There are particular strands of consumer duty, like consumer understanding, that I know brands in FS that will be very aligned with that in terms of their own branding principles, etc. And so we'll take those on board in a way that's probably more 5 years ahead than the now. I'm talking about accessibility requirements and, making sure that things are easy to understand for vulnerable customers, things like that. Are those the sorts of things that you've been coming across?
Yeah, so I think this is probably a slightly contrarian opinion, but most firms that I've worked with were always doing consumer duty pretty well before it was consumer duty, right? because I still see commentary on it in sort of industry publications and things of this game changer. I think it's very helpful, and I think it optimizes and provides some more clear guidelines than some of the regulation that existed before. But good firms do well by their clients, and they want to present them with information in a way that makes sense to them. They want to be valuable to them. They want to be fair. Clear, fair, misleading isn't a new thing in regulation, right? So they were doing all these things. What Consumer Duty has done, though, is firstly, it's made people's measurements much more robust. So a great example, I actually ran some workshops with some of my clients before the first Consumer Duty deadline, just to understand, okay, what does it mean for Consumer Duty? Customer understanding. What are you currently doing around that? And a great example, one of the firms I worked with, again, engaged with marketing teams, client service, compliance, and leadership team was, okay, we're running some surveys, we're asking for some information, that the responsibility that Consumer Duty brought in on the provider to say it's not good enough just to provide information and that be perceived that customers will read it and they'll understand it and that's good enough. The responsibility is now to make sure that it does actually get read by customers, that they do understand it, they do make the right decisions, etc. To say that you've got the option of an annual review or whatever, it isn't enough. Are they picking up on it? Are people doing anything? Are they using that premium banking account they've got, etc.? So that responsibility has shifted a little bit. A lot of it is kind of behavioural best practice in any case. So Consumer Duty, some of the work we did in testing communications, that should be in place always, right? You should always want to know if people genuinely understand what you're sending out. Fees and charges. The first on the way, people saying, do you understand our charges? No client, very few clients go and say, no, I don't. What person would feel comfortable thinking, I'm paying 1%, £10,000 a year, whatever it might be for advice, for example, or a quarter of a percent for my platform or my fund, and I've got no idea that I'm paying it. That doesn't feel very comfortable. I feel very incompetent if someone asks me that question. So I say, yes, I understand. A better way to ask those questions is, what are you paying? And variations of that, because then someone might say, oh, I don't know, 500 quid, or they might say 20,000. So we can test, do they understand, rather than the test of, are they saying that they understand? And it sounds like semantics, but that's the difference. That's just good behavioural best practice for understanding what drives people, what influences them, and their understanding is one of those areas. But understanding whether someone's actually receiving fair value, whether they're understanding communications, whether things are presented to them in a way that makes sense, we need to test those things properly. And by using best practices, we can test them better than simply asking, are we sending out the right stuff? Are we doing things from our side? So I think that's a big shift I've seen, and that's been really welcomed by companies I deal with in any case. And then there are some bad eggs in the financial services industry, I'm sure in every industry. I think Consumer Duty is really good at targeting those people, but the sorts of companies that I work with aren't those in any case. So it's a tweak to what they're already doing.
Yeah, and like with digital journeys, I guess, communications and testing is something you should be always refining, because there's always more that you can do. And as we've talked about, that's one of the problems. There's always more that you can do. So half of the battle is choosing the right thing.
Just on that side, the real value there lies in the outliers. And that's something that this I'm doing here is, if we think of a sort of a bell curve of responses, so digital journeys, people dropping off at a certain point, what tends to happen is companies look at an average for most things. So the drop-off rate is reduced from X to Y. That's good. We don't look at the tail ends of that. And those tail ends, particularly for Consumer Duty, for example, are really important, because those tail ends might be vulnerable people. Who are the ones that haven't read this thing? Oh, 90% of people have read it, but actually 80% of vulnerable people haven't read this. So that's something that, in terms of the insights we get from digital journeys, is we want to understand the averages. And it's always a helpful global measure of stuff. But to get insight, back to your point earlier, different data and insight, to get insight, we need the right question. The right question there would be, let's look at some of our vulnerable clients. What behaviours do those people undertake? Okay, that's the tail end that we're talking about. Those outliers are actually the ones we care about. This document here, who hasn't read it? Rather than the fact that 90% of people have read it, this is a really important document. There are some important terms and things in the client's agreement or whatever that might be, and fact sheets. Let's look at those outliers. Rather than say we're happy with the average figure, let's investigate who those people are, who finds this inaccessible, who doesn't understand, and asking those sorts of questions. And that's a real, again, it's behavioural best practice in any case, looking for those outliers, but a real shift in how we're measuring what good looks like in digital journeys, particularly as a result of regulation such as consumer duty.
Yeah, and especially at the provider end, those outliers, those outlying segments of people or cohorts can be a lot of people that you're doing a disservice to. In terms of wrapping up then, for businesses looking to improve their digital experience, their digital customer journeys, and that might be different for providers as providers, it might be the same. What advice would you give, or what advice do you find yourself giving again and again on how to make improvements in this area beyond the, working through the map that you've given? Are there any sort of tidbits, takeaways, digestible bites you can give us?
I'm going to go back to the map first, and then I'll
yeah.
because it's straightforward, and a listener to this podcast should genuinely reflect on whether they would follow this in their organization. There's no judgment, because lots of people don't. I mean, if you start with a strategy, what needs to change? What's going on at the moment? Who do we need to change the behavior of? What does that behavior actually look like? Simplify what needs to be done and what's happening at the moment. Then highlight what are the best insights? What's the best way to get the insights that you need based on the problem that you've already identified? Then apply as quickly as possible. Test things as quickly as possible. Test in a way that you're not asking people for feedback. You're testing a hypothesis. In a very kind of it's my academic hat here, but it works so well in my consulting work with companies, where you have a hypothesis and you test whether it works. And if it doesn't, you go back to that, highlight and think, okay, what do we not understand the first time round? Once you test that, so the S, strategy, highlight, apply, P, prove. If you can validate that something's working, it's a much easier sell to the board, to whoever's involved, to get funding, to get buy-in from internal teams, other departments, for example, compliance, when you can say that we've run this test, we've proved that something works, we want to roll it out and we need your help, because that's what takes resources, right? If you're dealing with 100,000 clients, that's the tricky bit, the internal buy-in and all those sorts of things. So prove that it works, and then E, the embed, and making sure that we don't just get some insights, learn a bit from it, but it's kept as a kind of silo in a product team or in a marketing team, customer experience team, that we can show the benefit and roll it out. If businesses follow those 5 steps, and it's never as clean cut as that. I'd love to be able to say every project follows those 5 steps in sequence. You come back and you learn and do stuff again. But if you meet each of those points, everything becomes so much easier, and it becomes easier to speak the same language as other people in the organization as well. And that's a big thing that I find, particularly when I'm working with, say, insights teams. One of the biggest jobs that they face is communicating that insight to others in a business, in digital business. And that's why people love data, because it reduces the language barrier, right? You say, here's the thing, it's not subjective, here's a data point. But if we can get more people on board with what's going on and we can validate that things are working, it makes everyone's jobs much easier.
That's great. Thank you. That was digestible enough for me. So before we leave, where can we find you? Where can our listeners find you online?
LinkedIn is a good place. Philip Courtney, from a name be spelt somewhere on the notes for this, or humansandmoney.com is a good place as well.
Great stuff. Thanks, Phil. We'll speak to you soon.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks, Sam. All the best.